August 6, 1945, 8:14 a.m. Dr. Akira Tanaka adjusted his surgical mask and glanced through the window at the sky. A single aircraft. Strange. American bombers never came to Hiroshima alone. The morning had started like any other morning in wartime Japan. Akira had kissed his pregnant wife Yuki goodbye at 6:30 a.m., watching as she cradled her swollen belly with one hand while preparing breakfast with the other. Their 5-year-old son, Kenji, sat at the low table, playing with his wooden toy train, making soft engine noises with his lips. "Papa, will the war end soon?" Kenji had asked, his innocent eyes looking up at his father. Akira knelt down, ruffling his son's black hair. "Soon, Kenji." Very soon. He didn't know if he believed his own words. The Americans were closing in. Tokyo had been firebombed. Okinawa had fallen. But Hiroshima had been spared the worst of it. Some said it was because the city had no major military installations. Others whispered it was because Americans had relatives here, former immigrants who had returned to Japan. Akira didn't care about the reason. He was just grateful his family was safe. Yuki handed him his lunchbox, wrapped carefully in cloth. "Be careful today," she said softly. "I'm always careful." Akira smiled, though the tiredness showed in his eyes. He'd been working 16-hour shifts at the Hiroshima Red Cross Hospital. The wounded kept coming. Soldiers from the front, civilians from air raids on nearby cities, disease, malnutrition. War had many ways of killing. The walk to the hospital took 20 minutes. Hiroshima was awake but subdued. People moved through the streets with the practiced efficiency of a population that had learned to conserve energy. Food was rationed. Hope was rationed. But people endured. That's what they did. At the hospital, the morning briefing was routine. Dr. Yamamoto, the senior physician, went through the patient list. 15 new admissions overnight. 3 soldiers with infected wounds. 2 children with fever. An elderly man with chest pain. "The Americans bombed Nagasaki's harbor again last night," Yamamoto said, his voice matter-of-fact. "We should expect wounded to be transferred here within 2 days." Akira nodded, making notes. Just another day. Just another war. He walked to the second-floor surgical ward, where his first patient waited. A young soldier, barely 20, with a leg wound that refused to heal. Akira examined the infection, prescribed what little antibiotics they had left, and moved to the next bed. Through the window, the morning sun cast long shadows across the hospital courtyard. It was going to be a hot day. August in Hiroshima was always humid, sticky, suffocating. At 8:14 a.m., Akira was washing his hands at the surgical station when he heard it. A low rumble. Distant, growing louder. Aircraft engines, but what he didn't know yet was that in 43 seconds, the world would change forever. He walked to the window, along with 2 nurses who had also heard the sound. In the cloudless blue sky, a single B-29 bomber gleamed silver in the morning sun. It was flying high, very high, higher than most bombers flew. "Just one," Nurse Hiromi said, confused. "Maybe it's a reconnaissance flight," Akira suggested. The air raid sirens hadn't sounded. That was strange. Usually, the sirens wailed at the first sign of American aircraft. But today, nothing. The city below continued its morning routine. People walked to work, children played, vendors opened their shops. The B-29 was almost directly overhead now. "It's turning," Nurse Hiromi observed. Akira watched as the aircraft banked slightly, then leveled out. For a moment, everything seemed suspended in time. The aircraft, the city, his breath. Then he saw it, a small dark object falling from the bomb bay. It tumbled through the air, almost lazily, like a leaf falling from a tree. "Get down!" Akira shouted, though he didn't know why. Some instinct, some primal warning that screamed in his brain. At 8:15 and 17 seconds, the world turned white. Not gradually, not like sunrise, but instantly, completely. A light brighter than 1,000 suns exploded above Hiroshima at an altitude of 1,900 feet. Akira didn't see it. No one could see it. It was beyond seeing, beyond comprehension. The light hit his retinas, and his brain simply shut down visual processing for a fraction of a second, overwhelmed by photons that shouldn't exist in nature. Then came the heat. In the first millisecond after detonation, the temperature at ground zero reached 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to vaporize human flesh, hot enough to melt metal, hot enough to turn sand into glass. The hospital was 1.2 miles from ground zero, far enough to not be instantly incinerated, close enough to be devastated. The thermal wave hit the building like an invisible wall of furnace air. Every window on the south side of the hospital exploded inward simultaneously. Glass fragments became thousands of tiny knives, flying at hundreds of miles per hour. Akira had turned away from the window at the last second. The glass shredded the back of his white coat, but missed his neck. He felt himself lifted off his feet and thrown backward. He slammed into the far wall, the air knocked from his lungs. For a moment, maybe 2 seconds, maybe 5, time had lost all meaning. There was perfect silence. His ears rang with a high-pitched whine. He couldn't hear anything else. He opened his eyes but saw only white afterimages, burned into his retinas by that impossible light. Then the shockwave arrived. What he saw when he stood up was beyond any nightmare a doctor could imagine. The pressure wave, traveling at over 700 miles per hour, hit the hospital like the fist of an angry god. The building shook. Ceiling tiles fell. The wall behind Akira cracked. He heard, or rather felt, a deep subsonic boom that resonated in his chest cavity, making his heart skip a beat. His vision slowly returned, though everything was blurred, doubled. He blinked, trying to clear his eyes. Dust filled the air. Smoke, the smell of burning. Something. Wood? Cloth? Flesh? He staggered to his feet, his legs unsteady. The surgical ward was destroyed. Beds had been overturned. Medical equipment lay scattered across the floor. Patients who had been sitting up were now sprawled on the ground, many bleeding from glass wounds. Nurse Hiromi was on the floor, unconscious but breathing. The other nurse was gone. No, there, half buried under a collapsed section of ceiling. "Help!" A weak voice. One of the patients. Akira's medical training kicked in, overriding his shock. He moved toward the voice, climbing over debris. His hands found a pulse. Weak but present. He began triaging, his mind switching into the familiar patterns of emergency medicine. But even as his hands worked, his mind screamed a single question. What was that? Not a normal bomb. Nothing about that light, that heat, that shockwave was normal. And then a second question, this one louder, more desperate. Yuki. Kenji. His house was closer to the city center than the hospital, much closer. His hands froze on a bandage. No. Focus. Do your job. They're fine. They have to be fine. The house is sturdy. They're in the basement. It's safe there. They're fine. He continued working, but his movements were mechanical now, automatic. His mind was elsewhere, racing through calculations, distances, blast radiuses that he didn't even know he knew. Within 3 minutes of the blast, the hospital was in chaos. Wounded began arriving. Not dozens, hundreds. They came from the direction of the city center, moving like ghosts through the smoke. Some walked, some crawled. Some were carried by others who themselves were wounded. Akira's first clear look at them made his stomach turn. Their clothes had been burned off, leaving only tatters hanging from charred skin. Where the cloth had been, their skin was white, blistered, peeling. Where they had been exposed, the skin was burned black, cracked like overcooked meat. But the worst were their faces. Many had been looking up when the flash came. The thermal radiation had burned their faces, melted their features, eyes swollen shut, lips burned away. Some had their skin hanging in strips like melting wax. They didn't scream. That was somehow worse. They just moaned softly or walked in silence. Their arms held out in front of them because the skin hurt too much to let their arms hang at their sides. "Water, water," the word repeated like a prayer. "Don't give them water," Dr. Yamamoto shouted. "Not until we assess their injuries." But there were too many. The hospital's capacity was 200 patients. Within 30 minutes, there were over 1,000 wounded in the building, in the courtyard, in the streets outside. Akira worked without thinking. Bandage, injection. Move to the next patient. Bandage, injection. Next patient. His mind had fragmented into two parts, one that performed medical procedures and one that screamed silently about his family. "Dr. Tanaka!" He looked up. One of the orderlies, a young man named Takeshi. "Your wife's house. It's in District 8, isn't it?" Akira's blood turned to ice. "Yes." Takeshi's face said everything. "District 8 is gone. Everything from District 5 to District 10, just gone." The bandage fell from Akira's hands. At that moment, Akira had to make the decision no doctor ever wants to face. A child was dying in front of him, a girl, maybe 7 years old, severe burns covering 60% of her body. She needed immediate intervention. He had the morphine in his hand. He had the skills. He could save her. But his wife, his son, his unborn child. The girl's eyes found his, pleading silently. "District 8 is gone." His hands shook. "Doctor?" Another nurse waiting for instructions. "Everything from District 5 to District 10. He looked at the girl, then toward the window, toward the smoke rising from the city center. Just gone. "Dr. Tanaka!" The nurse's voice was sharp now. He made his decision. He administered the morphine to the girl, adjusted her position to prevent shock, and barked instructions to the nurse. Then he grabbed Dr. Yamamoto by the arm. "I have to go. My family." Yamamoto looked at him with exhausted eyes. "Akira, we need every doctor. My pregnant wife and my 5-year-old son are in District 8. The words hung in the smoke-filled air. Yamamoto closed his eyes for a moment, then nodded. "Go. But Akira, prepare yourself." Stepping outside the hospital was like entering another world. The sky had turned a sickly orange-brown, filled with smoke and ash. The sun was barely visible, a dim red disk behind the haze. The air itself felt wrong, hot, dry, filled with floating particles that made breathing difficult. Akira began walking toward the city center, toward District 8, toward his home. The streets were rivers of wounded. People stumbled past him, moving away from ground zero, seeking help, seeking water, seeking death, because at least death would end the pain. An elderly woman sat by the side of the road, her kimono burned into her back. She wasn't crying. She wasn't moving. She just sat, staring at nothing. A man carried a child in his arms, but Akira could see from the unnatural angle of the child's neck, from the stillness, that he was carrying a corpse. The man didn't seem to notice, or couldn't accept it. Bodies lay in the streets, some intact, some not. Some impossible to identify as ever having been human, but the worst part was still ahead. The invisible killer had been born. As Akira moved closer to the city center, the destruction became more absolute. Buildings no longer existed as structures. They had been reduced to rubble, flattened as if stepped on by a giant. Wooden houses had simply vanished, leaving only their stone foundations and smoking debris. Fires burned everywhere. Not the normal orange flames of a house fire, but strange blue-white fires that seemed to burn without fuel, consuming stone and metal. The heat was intense. Akira's face felt sunburned, though he'd been inside during the flash. The soles of his shoes grew hot, walking over the scorched pavement. And then he saw them, the shadows. On the walls of concrete buildings that still stood, there were shadows, human silhouettes burned into the stone. A man reaching for a door, a woman carrying a basket, a child sitting on steps. They had been vaporized so instantly by the thermal radiation that their shadows were permanently etched where they had blocked the light for a fraction of a second before ceasing to exist. Akira felt his mind beginning to fracture. This wasn't war. This wasn't even massacre. This was something beyond human comprehension, something from hell itself. He passed a reservoir where people had tried to escape the heat. The water was filled with corpses, floating face down, boiled. "Water. Please." A woman lay by the reservoir's edge, her hand stretched toward the water she couldn't reach. Akira knelt, ready to help her, and then froze. Her back was a mass of melted flesh, exposing muscle and bone. He could see her spine. She was alive, but she wouldn't survive the hour. "Please, just push me. Into the water." He understood. She wanted the pain to end. His hand moved toward her. then stopped. He was a doctor. He saved lives. He didn't... Please. Her voice was barely a whisper now. Akira's hand trembled. Then he gently pushed her shoulder, rolling her into the water. She sighed as she slipped beneath the surface and didn't come up. He stood there for a moment, staring at his hand. Then he kept walking, and that's when he heard it, from beneath the rubble. District 8 didn't exist anymore. Akira stood at what should have been the corner of his street and couldn't recognize anything. Every landmark was gone. The neighborhood shrine, obliterated. The corner shop where Kenji loved to watch the fish, nothing but a crater. The row of houses where his family had lived for generations, erased. He tried to orient himself using the mountains in the distance, calculating where his house should be. His feet moved mechanically, climbing over rubble, around burning debris. "Yuki!" His voice was hoarse from smoke and dust. "Kenji!" No answer, just the crackling of fires and the distant moans of the dying. He reached what he believed was his property. There was no house, just a pile of collapsed wood and tile. The traditional Japanese structure had been blown apart and burned. "No!" The word escaped his lips. "No, no, no." He began digging with his bare hands, throwing aside charred beams, broken tiles, melted metal. His hands bled. He didn't notice. "Yuki! Kenji! Answer me!" Silence. He dug faster, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Under a collapsed section of roof, he found a piece of cloth, Yuki's favorite summer dress, the one with small flowers. It was burned, but recognizable. His hands closed around it, trembling. Then his foot struck something. He looked down. Kenji's wooden train, the one his grandfather had carved. Somehow, impossibly, it was intact, a small miracle in a landscape of death. He picked it up, and that's when he heard it, a cough, weak, from beneath the rubble. "Yuki!" He threw himself at the debris, digging with renewed desperation. "Yuki, hold on." "Akira?" The voice was faint, muffled, but unmistakably his wife's. It took him 20 minutes to clear enough rubble to reach them. The basement. They'd been in the basement. The old stone basement that Akira's grandfather had built had partially survived. The house had collapsed on top of it, but the walls had held, creating a small pocket of survival in the midst of devastation. Yuki was lying against the wall, her face covered in dust and small cuts. Her dress was torn, but she was alive. Beside her, curled into a ball, was Kenji. His eyes were wide open, staring at nothing, but he was breathing. "Akira!" Yuki's hand reached up weakly. "The light! What was that light?" He climbed down into the basement, his medical mind automatically assessing injuries. Yuki had a piece of wood embedded in her left side, just above her hip. Blood had soaked her dress. Her breathing was shallow, possible internal bleeding. Shock. The pregnancy. "We're going to get you to the hospital," he said, his voice steady, despite the terror in his chest. "Kenji won't speak," Yuki whispered. "He saw, when the light came, he was looking out the basement window. He saw something. Now he won't speak." Akira looked at his son. Kenji's eyes were focused on something that wasn't there. His small hands clutched around his wooden train. "It's okay," Akira said, though nothing was okay. "You're both okay now. I'm here." He carefully examined Yuki's wound. The wood had to come out, but not here. If he removed it now without proper surgical support, she could bleed out in minutes. He bandaged around it, stabilizing it. "Can you walk?" I don't think so." He looked at her, at Kenji, at the destroyed city around them, and made a calculation. The hospital was 1.2 miles away, carrying his pregnant wife with an embedded foreign object, through a burning city, with aftershocks still rattling the ground. Impossible. He'd do it anyway. 1,500 meters, through a burning city. And Yuki was fading with every minute. He lifted Yuki as gently as possible, supporting her weight against his chest. She gasped in pain but bit her lip to stay quiet. He couldn't carry both of them, so he crouched down to Kenji. "Kenji, I need you to walk with Papa. Can you do that? Hold on to my coat. Don't let go. No matter what you see, don't let go." Kenji didn't respond, but his small hand gripped Akira's coat. They began the journey back. The walk became a blur of horror. Akira's arms screamed in agony after the first 5 minutes. Yuki wasn't heavy, but carrying a person for any distance is exhausting. Add in the heat, the smoke, the obstacles, and it became a marathon of suffering. "Mitsu, Mitsu," the chorus of the dying followed them. Water. Everyone wanted water. Akira had learned from the other doctors that giving water to severe burn victims could kill them. Something about fluid balance, shock, internal injuries. But these people were dying anyway. What did medical protocol matter in hell? He stopped at a broken water main, let Yuki rest against a wall, and filled his cupped hands with water, bringing it to people's lips. Many were too weak to swallow. Some did, and thanked him with their eyes, because their mouths could no longer form words. Kenji followed silently, his hand never leaving his father's coat, his eyes still seeing something that wasn't there. They passed a mother holding a baby. Both were burned badly. The mother's eyes met Akira's. "Is my baby okay?" she asked. "Please tell me my baby is okay." Akira looked at the infant. It was already dead. Had been, for probably an hour, but the mother either couldn't see it or couldn't accept it. "Your baby is sleeping," Akira said softly. "Let her sleep." The mother smiled, relieved, and continued gently rocking the small corpse. Akira kept walking. He passed a fire station where firefighters had tried to respond to the initial fires. Their truck was melted metal. The men were scattered around it, some still in formation, turned to charcoal statues. He passed a school. The children had been doing morning calisthenics in the courtyard when the bomb fell. They were still there, in rows, shadows burned into the concrete. And then Akira understood. This wasn't just an explosion. This was something that would kill forever. At one point, they met another doctor heading toward the city center. "Dr. Tanaka, you're going the wrong way. We need you at the hospital." "My wife," Akira said simply, adjusting his grip on Yuki. The other doctor looked at Yuki, then at the destroyed city, then back at Akira. Understanding passed between them. The understanding that in the face of such enormity, the only thing that mattered was the people you loved. "The patients at the hospital," the other doctor said slowly. "They're developing strange symptoms. Purple spots on their skin. Hair falling out. Vomiting blood. We don't understand what's happening." "New weapon," Akira said. "American. We don't know what it is. Some are saying it was an atomic bomb, like splitting the atom, like the physicists talked about." Akira had heard rumors, theoretical discussions among educated people. Splitting atoms to release energy. It seemed like science fiction, but if this was what splitting atoms created, they had unleashed something beyond war, beyond weapons. They had unleashed the power of the sun itself on a city of civilians. "God help us all," Akira whispered. When they finally reached the hospital, it looked like a scene from a medieval plague painting. The wounded filled every available space. The hallways, the stairs, the courtyard. Thousands of people, most with burns covering large parts of their bodies, all in various stages of dying. Medical staff moved through them like ghosts, doing what little they could. Bandaging, morphine for those lucky enough to get it, water, mostly just presents, so people didn't die alone. Akira carried Yuki to the surgical ward. Dr. Yamamoto saw him and immediately cleared a table. "The baby?" Yamamoto asked. "She's 8 months. If we're lucky." They worked quickly. Akira's hands, trained through years of surgery, moved automatically despite his exhaustion. Remove the wood, control the bleeding, check for internal damage, monitor the baby's heartbeat. Kenji sat in the corner, still silent, still clutching his wooden train. 2 hours of surgery. Yuki survived. The baby survived. Born premature, underweight, but alive. A girl. Crying with small, fragile lungs that somehow found the strength to wail in the midst of death. At dawn, when Yuki opened her eyes, she asked the question Akira feared most. Akira had not slept. He couldn't. The hospital never fell silent. All night, people died. Not tens, not hundreds, thousands. The doctors tried to keep count for the first few hours, then gave up. The numbers were too horrific. And the new symptoms the other doctor had mentioned were spreading. Patients who had seemed stable suddenly began bleeding from their gums, their their nose, their eyes. Purple spots appeared on their skin like bruises, but worse. Hair fell out in clumps. Vomiting, diarrhea, fever. The doctors had no explanation. These weren't burn symptoms. These weren't blast injuries. This was something else. Something invisible. Radiation poisoning, though they didn't have that term yet. They didn't understand that the bomb had released particles that tore through human cells, destroying DNA, killing slowly from the inside. People who had seemed fine, who had been far enough from ground zero to avoid burns, suddenly collapsed and died within hours. There was no pattern, no way to predict who would get sick and who wouldn't. Akira checked on patients mechanically, but his mind was elsewhere. With every person who developed these strange symptoms, his fear grew. Had he been exposed? Had Yuki? Had Kenji? How long until the symptoms appeared? Was this fate now hunting his family with invisible teeth? At dawn, Yuki's eyes opened. She was pale, weak, but conscious. "The baby," she whispered. "Alive. A girl. Small, but fighting." Relief flooded Yuki's face. Then fear replaced it. "Kenji, he's here. He's physically unhurt." But Akira looked at his son, still sitting in the corner, staring at nothing. "He won't speak. I think whatever he saw traumatized him. He might recover. He might not." Yuki began to cry, silent tears running down her dusty cheeks. Akira took her hand. "We're alive," he said firmly. "Against everything, we're alive. That has to mean something." "What was it?" Yuki asked. "What kind of weapon does that?" Akira had been thinking about this all night. He'd heard whispers from other doctors, from military personnel who'd come through. Atomic bomb, splitting atoms, chain reaction, science he barely understood turning into hell on earth. "The Americans," he said slowly, "have created a weapon that harnesses the power of the sun. They dropped a piece of the sun on us." Yuki stared at him. "How do we fight that?" "We don't," Akira said quietly. "No one can fight that. If they have more of these weapons, the war is over." But the invisible killer wasn't finished. It was just beginning. 3 days after the bombing, the true horror emerged. People who had been fine, who had helped with rescue efforts, who had thought they'd survived, began dying. A nurse who'd worked tirelessly for 72 hours suddenly collapsed. Within hours, she was bleeding from every orifice. She died before midnight. A firefighter who'd pulled dozens from rubble woke up covered in purple spots, dead by evening. A mother who'd walked from the city center with only minor burns suddenly began vomiting blood. Her hair fell out. She died holding her surviving child. The invisible killer showed no mercy. Akira realized with growing horror what was happening. The bomb hadn't just destroyed buildings. It had poisoned the air, the ground, the water. Everyone exposed to high levels of this radiation was dying slowly. And there was no cure, no treatment. They could only watch and try to make patients comfortable as their bodies destroyed themselves from within. He checked Yuki obsessively. Any new bruise sent his heart racing. Any sign of nausea made him panic. Kenji still didn't speak. He ate when food was given. He slept when exhausted. But he existed in silence, trapped somewhere inside himself where the flash had sent him. The baby, they named her Hana for hope, was fighting her own battle against prematurity, but she was strong. Akira saw his mother in her, that same stubborn refusal to die. On the 5th day, an American plane flew over the city, not to bomb, to photograph, to survey their work. Akira stood in the hospital courtyard and looked up at that plane, and for the first time in his life, he felt something beyond anger, beyond hatred. He felt terror at what humans had become capable of doing to each other. The official count would eventually reach 80,000 dead in the first day. But Akira knew the real number was higher, much higher. Bodies had been vaporized. Bodies had been washed away. Bodies had been buried in collapsed buildings. And the dying continued. Every day, more people developed radiation sickness. Every day, the hospitals filled beyond capacity. Every day, the doctors understood a little more about this new form of death. And every day, they felt more helpless against it. Yuki recovered slowly. The wound had been serious, but not fatal. She was young, strong, and determined to survive for her children. Hana grew stronger. Against all odds, the premature baby thrived. Perhaps because she'd been shielded by Yuki's body during the blast. Perhaps because she'd been born to fight. Kenji still didn't speak. Akira tried everything. Talking to him, reading to him, playing with his train. Nothing brought the light back to his son's eyes. He saw too much, Yuki said one evening, watching her son stare at nothing. Something broke inside him. He's 5 years old, Akira said, though his voice held no conviction. Children are resilient. We'll see, Yuki said softly. Time will tell. On August 9th, 3 days after Hiroshima, news reached them that another bomb had been dropped, this one on Nagasaki. Another city gone in an instant. On August 15th, the Emperor's voice crackled over the radio. The first time most Japanese had ever heard their God-King speak. Japan was surrendering. The war was over. Akira stood in the hospital courtyard, surrounded by thousands of wounded and dying, and listened to the announcement. The war was over. They had lost, and Akira felt relief. Because if the Americans had more of those bombs, and Japan kept fighting, then Tokyo would be next. Osaka, Kyoto. Every city turned to ash. Better surrender, better survive. But survival, Akira would learn, was its own form of suffering. Months passed. The Americans arrived as occupiers. They brought doctors, scientists, researchers. They studied the survivors like laboratory specimens, measuring radiation exposure, documenting symptoms, learning from the horror they'd created. Akira worked with some of them, American doctors who seemed genuinely horrified by what they saw. They shared what little they knew about radiation treatment. It wasn't much, mostly palliative care. Comfort, morphine. The city began to rebuild, slowly. But it would never be the same. Couldn't be the same. The shadows burned into walls served as permanent reminders. The orphans wandering the streets, the widows, the survivors with keloid scars covering their bodies, marking them forever as hibakusha, explosion-affected people. Yuki healed. Hana grew. Kenji remained silent. Akira developed a routine. Wake at dawn, kiss his wife, check on his children, walk to the hospital, work until exhaustion, return home, sleep, repeat. He never talked about that day. Neither did Yuki. What was there to say? How do you put hell into words? But sometimes, late at night, Akira would wake up and see that flash again behind his eyelids, that impossible white light that had changed everything, and he would wonder, did they know? The men who built that bomb, who flew that mission, who gave that order, did they understand what they were unleashing? Did they care? On August 6th, 1946, 1 year after the bombing, Akira stood at the ruins of the Genbaku Dome, the one building that had partially survived at Ground Zero, its skeletal frame a monument to destruction. Thousands gathered for a memorial ceremony. Prayers, tears, silence. Yuki stood beside him, holding Hana, now a healthy 1-year-old, and Kenji stood between them, still silent, still lost somewhere inside himself. The ceremony ended. People began to disperse. Akira knelt down to Kenji, as he did every day, hoping for something, anything. Kenji, do you want to go home? Silence. Akira sighed, stood up, and began to walk. Then he felt it, a small hand tugging his coat. He looked down. Kenji was looking up at him, and for the first time in a year, there was something in his eyes, not the vacant stare, something else, recognition, presence. Papa, Kenji whispered. One word, barely audible, but it was enough. Akira fell to his knees and pulled his son into his arms, and for the first time since that terrible morning, he wept. Yuki joined them, wrapping her arms around both of them. Hana pressed between them, and they stood there, a family that had survived hell, holding each other in the ruins of a city that had been destroyed by the sun. That night, Akira sat at his desk, a new desk, in a new house, because the old one was gone forever, and wrote in his journal, August 6th, 1946. 1 year ago, the world changed. A weapon was used that should never have been created. 80,000 died in an instant. Thousands more in the weeks and months that followed. Thousands more will die in the years to come from radiation's slow poison. I am a doctor. I have spent my life learning to heal, but I learned on that day that humanity has created something that cannot be healed, a wound that will never close. My son spoke today. One word, but it was everything. We survived. Against all probability, against all odds, my family survived. But so many didn't. So many families were erased in that flash of light. I don't know if the men who dropped that bomb understood what they were doing. I don't know if they sleep well at night. I hope they don't. I hope they are haunted as I am haunted. But more than that, I hope that this weapon is never used again. That humanity, having seen what it can do, will step back from this abyss. Because if we don't, if there is another war, and these bombs are used again, there will be no survivors. No doctors to treat the wounded, no hospitals, no cities, no future. Just ash and shadows and silence. The bomb that fell on Hiroshima fell only once, but it will kill forever. In the genes of survivors, in the trauma of children, in the fear that now lives in every human heart, we split the atom, and in doing so, we may have split humanity itself. I am a doctor. I heal, but I cannot heal this. Akira closed the journal and looked out the window at the night sky. Somewhere up there, stars burned with the same nuclear fire that had destroyed his city. Creation and destruction existing in the same flame. And humanity, having stolen that fire, would have to learn to live with what it had done, or die trying.